topic.
Oh.
So this is a workshop on preventing chronic violence, and it's actually grown out of research between myself and several other people. And one of those people is Carl Belzer, who's a professor at Baruch, and then we've been participating particularly around the question of violence prevention through dance, actively a form of neighborhood change, and then through poetry with Tandon Marshall, who's also here right now. And so we're going to look at this subject from a couple of different angles, but I just want to give a brief introduction to it before we kind of break it down. So the question here that I want everybody to kind of take away is, how does a mental element, how does a sociological or socio-ecological flow become embodied in the physical environment? How does something like socioeconomics become embodied in terms of people's lives? So kind of we say that core critical question that I think that maybe we can kind of address today is, how does ideas, socio-ecological ideas, become embodied? What is this process of embodiment? So this graph is a way of looking at that statistically. It looks at the red line, which is homicide rate in the United States, and the black lines are looking at the growth and saturation of 4 different kinds of infrastructure in the United States. Starting in the early 19th century with canals, and as you can see, there's a little bit of a correlation between the growth of canals and the drop in homicide rate. So this is the homicide rate in the United States as it existed at this time in history. And here is the homicide rate in the 19th century and the saturation of the infrastructure. So as the canals are being built, it reaches a certain point where the infrastructure really takes off, and a large portion of the American public starts to use this infrastructure like canals. It has an effect on the drop of homicide rate. Once it reaches around 70% saturation of that infrastructure, the homicide rate starts to go up. So it may be slightly confusing because its homicide rate is, for the purposes of this graph, switched. So the 0 is on the top, and 20 persons per 100,000 people are killed in the country. But the point is to show the correlation, all right? Because this graph kind of shows the correlation over 200 years longitudinally. As railroads are built, likewise, the homicide rate, which here is at a high in the 19th century of over 20 per 100,000 people in the entire United States, begins to drop as that infrastructure permeates more and more percentage of the American public. And then railroads, once they reach a certain point, around 70% saturation in the United States, the homicide rate again starts to go up. Roads, automobile highways, likewise, as they saturate more and more of the United States, the homicide rate begins to drop, starting at this point where it takes off. And then once it reaches around 70%, around the 1960s, the late 60s, the American homicide rate starts to go up. So there's almost, it's a fairly striking correlation, this kind of graph. How does something like infrastructure affect something like violence? All right, now the most recent infrastructure, which falls in the same 55-year cycle, is the internet. It's had a huge effect on the American public, and as it became adopted, even though the internet was invented in the mid-20th century, as we'll see, as it was adopted, the homicide rate dropped drastically, almost at exactly the same time.
Can I ask a question? How are you tying these two things together? Like, how do you know that these are impacting each other rather than just being...
I'm not yet saying that they're impacting each other. I'm just pointing out that there's a correlation.
It's just because they're both on the same graph. But, okay.
It's in doing this research, the question was, how do we prevent violence?
Right.
So we looked at a lot of different statistics over the course of some years, and nothing was so strikingly correlated as the adoption of these major infrastructures.
Okay, so
Somewhat,
they're but they're not.
it may not be cause and effect.
Okay.
That's not the thesis.
I was reading it wrong. Sorry.
Right, it's really to begin to open this idea up of what actually causes embodiment. Is there a relationship between violence and infrastructure in the United States? To look a little bit more closely at that internet adoption and homicide rate decline, there's again a very close relationship at the same pattern as the other major infrastructures, but then once it reaches a certain point, again 70%, maybe it will go up. So now that we're at internet adoption of over 70%, maybe similar to highways, there will be some kind of violent reaction to whatever it is, the people who don't use smartphones or the people who do use smartphones or some kind of app or whatever it is may cause some kind of societal breakdown, some level, cause violence to rise. Maybe, okay? In particular, let's think about how that happens spatially, all right? If this is New York City's violence rates, all right, this is the United States, the same up and down, all right? And here it's not switched, so in other words, the higher the violence, the higher it is on the graph. In the early 20th century, there's a rise during that railroad era. Before cars are adopted, the violence goes down. Then as there's many studies on highways built in the Bronx, around the United States, they cut off neighborhoods, people feel disinvested in, they feel left behind, violence goes way up. And that happened also in the United States as a whole. In particular, in New York City at the time, it happened a lot more than the United States as a whole, okay? In particular neighborhoods in New York City, like in East Brooklyn, this is Brownsville, Brooklyn. In particular, the 73rd precinct, the violence rate estimated during that railroad era, the early 20th century gangster era, it was fairly high, around 49 people per 100,000. That's really high. That's like Venezuela today. Okay. In the 1970s, 80s, Brownsville was much higher. Okay, like 89 people per. That was the high. 89 per 100,000 people. So you looked at violence a lot. It's quite high, and so there's a spatial epidemiology as well that may have to do with these infrastructures as a whole. This looks at it more closely, and it's also worth thinking about: is it going up now in areas? In New York City as a whole, it is not going up, but maybe that's because there's so much displacement and gentrification in New York City. Maybe violence is going up in rural areas or in suburban exurbs around New York City, in Newburgh, or in many areas, but that's another question. All right, so this is looking at that spatial epidemiology. This is Brooklyn, north to south. Here's downtown Brooklyn. Here's East Brooklyn. This is a map, a graph of socioeconomics. So the red being the high, the peaks, where there's more wealth, and blue being the valleys, where there's less wealth, where there's more poverty, as well as a series of other factors, but essentially socioeconomic factors. This is a graph that traces it over time. So you can see, just like choose one place on the graph, for example, here in downtown Brooklyn, it becomes much more wealthy. All right, the socioeconomics change greatly, and so does the epidemiology of violence. By contrast, Brownsville, look over here from the 1940s, is consistently blue. Brownsville, East Brooklyn. East New York actually becomes much more poor. Bed-Stuy similarly, and then becomes rich again. Oops. So you can see that here, 1992, where there was that very high spike in violence before the internet becomes adopted. And incidentally, there's certain areas where there's very high violence and there's less wealth. Now here's the question, here's like kind of the question which we have been trying to address in terms of practice, which is what this workshop is about, which is, what is it called when that socio-ecological flow, rather sociological flow, something like socioeconomics becomes embodied, or when a mental idea becomes a physical idea? And there's different ways of describing that. And one kind of technology that's developed at the exact same time as the internet is sometimes referred to as hip hop. And it's essentially it's called a cipher, okay? And my colleagues will also elucidate more the meaning of that term. But I want to show you here, because here violence up, violence down. The adoption of roads, 1969, violence starts to rise. This is also the moment when hip hop is spawned in the Bronx, okay, where this cipher technology is spawned in the Bronx. Is there a relationship between the presence of violence and other embodiment of cultural factors? Okay, as the years go on, there's things like the Macintosh, there's personal computer developed, the Walkman. And meanwhile, there's these ciphers, and the ciphers become more and more complex. They become more and more effective way of changing the atmosphere in real time, okay? Now, very interesting here, the adoption of the internet and the drop of violence at the exact same time is also when hip hop becomes mainstream, becomes very popularized in the 90s. That is a correlation, because clearly the internet didn't create hip hop and hip hop didn't create the internet, but there's something technologically going on in the United States, all right? Then these apps become developed over time. They become big companies, like Google now as a powerhouse was created around 2000, the year 2000, so very recently. Here we are now, the saturation rate of the internet at that high, and the violence rate is starting to go up in the United States. So it's kind of like, this is just another thing to keep in mind, is like the people who created this hip hop technology and created the internet were doing it in 1969. That's when roads and highway use was pervasive across the country. Today, the same thing is happening, but somewhere people are creating like that next wave of technology. They're creating the new internet, they're creating the new art form as well. Okay, let me look more detail. Excuse me. One more question to think about, this is called Moore's Law, is the idea that transistors and computers become increasingly small as technology improves. So from 1900, the technology has improved and the computers have become extremely small. So they used to be the size of a room in the 1950s, then they became the size of a desk, then they became the size of a phone, and actually now, they don't need to be a phone. We have like cellular computers. So this is another question is about embodiment, is like maybe that technology is kind of over. Okay, so maybe we're already on to the next thing. Maybe the next thing is already being developed. And so Nancy Krieger articulates ecosocial theory, that in the social margins is where socioeconomics and socio-ecological flows in society become embodied. It's called ecosocial theory. And here's a way of thinking about that, this map. One person, you, me, each of us, we have all these things happening in our lives that lead to who we are right now, today. We've embodied various things in our entire experience, life experience. The food we eat, our neighborhoods, our friends, enemies, etc. And then what's very interesting for an embodiment question, for that atmospheric manipulation, for the architecture of the lived experience, is when people get together. So like we are today, we're actually sharing a physical space together. I think sometimes in a lecture environment, people think, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go sit and watch, take the information. It's just as possible to do that behind a screen or to do that in real life. It doesn't feel different, but when you're thinking about it in terms of a cipher, right? We're bringing all kinds of other socio-ecological flows into the present, all right? So cipher has other meanings. One is the cryptographic meaning. It could be related to things like blockchain. It's this kind of black box theory, meaning, but another way that it's been used is in dance and in spoken word. And so I was thinking that, Tymel, perhaps you could share with the group about your experiences with the cipher and what that means.
How y'all doing? Yeah, right. I want to get blonde and all that. All right, there we go. Cipher to me basically means unity. What I mean by unity, it's different aspects of different people coming from different type of parts of the world or different projects, neighborhoods. We all dealing with the same type of issues, but just in a different type of way. And it could be for people that don't have a voice. So when they come into that cipher, they feel comfortable of having that voice. You're not being judged. You're not, everybody's listening, learning, and taking heed and taking feedback. Other things about a cipher that I like about is it reminds me of meditation in a way. Meditation, you sit there, you be quiet, but you still be focused on you being meditating. Same thing with a cipher. A cipher is when you sit there, if you hear a beat, you figure out the beat. You catch a rhythm to the beat. You don't have to think about it. Your body will tell you, like, all right, this is how you say the words or whatever. Then it's on you for that topic to which you want to express. It could be a social topic. It could be something going home. It could be something, but regardless, when you're in that cipher, you're still going to touch somebody that's, I'm not going to say afraid, but probably don't want to speak on those type of issues because they probably be judged or anything like that. So it's like you becoming the front person for that person. The lyrics, I could say for the cipher, it could be any type of lyrics. It depends how you feel comfortably with it. The beat, it could be a random beat. It could be a beat from banging on the door, anything like that. Or you could just see it or just come up with your head of what you just see. So, for instance, Carl right here, he dance. He do freestyle type dancing. I could sit and I could watch him how he moved to the certain songs, maybe the instrumental that he played. It gives me a vibe or something to talk about, a topic, or I could feel a pain in the way how he's thinking. So, like I said, a cipher is just unity. It's something you observe, something that you gain from everybody. So that's why I think basically you could say data. If it's a data thing, you could say from anybody neighborhood. I'm from Brownsville. So everything that I see from there, from our natural resources to the worst things, to the cops, to the youth being disrespectful, I take that all in as once. And I try to address that into a cipher so everybody could know around it's just not all about the regular thing, money, this. We all have to go through the struggle to get to that type of thing. So we have to understand each other before we could get there. And that's what I think, to me personally, a spoken word or a cipher is to me. And that's it. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Is it a physical place? Like when somebody says the cipher, are they talking about a physical place?
I think not physical, I think mental. It's just it's a mental thing. Because you could have a cipher with yourself. You could be in the house and you could probably listen to a Beyonce, Lady Gaga, if you want to be a singer, whatever, and you sit there and you actually practice these type of things. It's just like a memoir. Just like when you're in school and they teach you who, what, when, where, how, when, such and such, you're perfecting that craft. So you could sit there and you could come up with 5 different topics and go about those topics, and they all could all like revolve around each other, you feel me? So at that time, like I'm saying, all of that is just a mental thing. It gives you a unity, it gives you peace. It have your mind, I say, more focused and more, not in box, but out of the box. It tackles different things. It makes you think like, oh, should I talk about this? Or I'm scared to talk about this. Go do that. Because it stretches you out. It stretches your mind, it stretches your thoughts. And you helping somebody else, if you don't believe it or not, that probably scared to talk about that type of thing. And if you say things like that, they probably run up to you after like, yo, thank you. I was just going through that. You just helped me, this and the third. Ciphers prevent a lot, regardless. It's just a spiritual thing too. It brings a happy feeling so everybody could hear each other out.
Why is it called cipher?
Because it's basically everybody sharing their experience. So it's just like how we all here right now. I don't know what she do. They don't know what I do. But if I sit here and I explain myself and explain where I come from, they will have an idea. Just like if they sit here and they explain their future or past, whatever, I will understand or get an idea of them. And that's what a cipher is. It's just taking a little bit of what you know or what you hear about somebody from their mouth and apply it to yourself, and it becomes unity.
What about like freestyle? You know what I mean? Where does freestyle, like, you know, sometimes people say like, okay, it's straight off the dome or whatever. Where does it actually come from?
My freestyle, I say it comes basically, freestyle comes from the heart. I'm gonna say basically, it comes from the heart. It's different from writing, because that's like a script. You already know the words. But if you do a freestyle, that means everything is unpredictable. That means you're speaking from emotion. So even if you mess up, like half of the people that try it, they have messed up because they just thinking of too much things. You just flow on the feeling. If you feel happy, you talk the happiest thing that you ever experienced. If you feel sad or anything like that, you express that from your heart. You're not thinking. You're not trying to make up words. You're actually speaking spoken words in your body that you want everybody to understand. So that's what freestyle is.
Is there a dialogue? Like, for example, if people here went to the cipher at Union Square on Fridays, there's sometimes people have a dialogue. Is that part of it? Is that part of the tradition, or where is that coming from?
I really tell you the truth. I don't think it's a dialogue or anything like that. In my opinion, because I go to the ciphers and stuff like that too. There's some people that been there for years that been doing that. It's like you coming in like the first day of class. You're going to get nervous. You're going to such and such, but just go and just speak your truth. At the end of the day, you can't say that you failed. You can't look down upon yourself if you speak your own truth. At the end of the day, it probably take a while for people to get it, but as long as you stick with it and in your heart, you know what you're saying and you know what you believe in, and you push forward to that, they'll catch on.
I think she had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. Yes.
I was just wondering if there's certain spaces where ciphers.
From the line, like how he showed, like back in the 60s, I'm very young, but like back in the 60s, ciphers used to happen around like a playground, play park, in front of your building. Anywhere, I'm gonna say, because it was an urban thing at that time. Anywhere where you have a free space in the urban community to gather each other.
So it could be outside, or it could be a public space?
It could be outside. Yeah. It could be in your hallway. It's just anywhere you have an available space and you have that time and that freedom and decide to have that unity. Anywhere. It could be on the beach. Y'all could be surfing, rapping to each other. It's just you gotta feel that moment, have that unity with each other. So it doesn't matter about the space at all. It don't. Go ahead, no problem.
Is it something where you sort of like know who's showing up, or is it something that sort of you want to have it in more public space to get people who you wouldn't normally get contribute?
I say, personally me, I think that it would be better to have it in an open space, because if you have it in a closed space and every week you see the same person, there's no progressing. There's no progression to it, because you see the same person, you expect it already. But if you have it in an open space, you don't know who will pass through. It could be a famous person and be like, I like your tune, I like your word. Or it could be somebody who was doing literature and you speaking spoken word, not even rapping, just speaking spoken word, and they be like, yo, I want you to come and do this literature for me or anything like that. It's just for your voice to be heard. Don't have a gift or anything and just have it in a closed space. Express it to the world, no matter what. So I think that open space is the best space to have it at.
Do you think that there's any kind of similarity between something like Twitter and a cipher?
Yes. I don't have a Twitter, but I know a lot of people who do. It's basically your opinion. Just like in a cipher, you can have the opinion. Like if it was a political type opinion of a cipher. Some people probably be with Obama. Some people probably be with Trump. Some people probably give a good point of view on Obama. Some people probably give a good point of view on Trump. Just like Twitter, everybody has their opinions. It's either you like it or you don't. It's just like a cipher. You sit there and somebody just talking about money, blah, 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 blah. In your head, you have that decision to walk away. Versus if somebody's actually speaking truthfulness and things that's going around in the world, your body and your mind will tell you to stay. You actually like it. So I think yes, that do. They connect. Yes.
And when you cite, for example, you talk about the beat.
Yes.
That's for example, the music. And
Yes.
then when you talk or express yourself, you rap or with a rhythm of the beat or you talk?
It could be all right. It could be spoken word. You don't have to do with a beat. Some people prefer a beat because they hear the rhythm. If you hear a rhythm like your mind process that beat and catch on to the rhythm of that beat. Some people just like to rap. I say a cappella. It's like spoken word but a cappella. But when you hear the words, it have a rhyme rhythm to it. So you necessarily don't need the beat. The beat just hypes the person up. It just gives them more belief, let me say. Versus not having a beat and you just sitting there and you just saying the word. You won't have that much belief because you don't have that battery in your back, let me say.
In our workshops that we've done, with a group of people, we usually think about like, how does this street or this intersection translate into a beat? Like today, this moment, and then each person adds that, and then we create a freestyle together. Do you, like, how would you describe, like, let's say we're talking about that intersection of like Pitkin, or well, let's just say Belmont and Rockaway. Today, is there any kind of beat or song that comes to mind?
Right now, I could say Kendrick Lamar. That's in my head. A song I could say is called Love. I think it's called Love or Loyalty. I'm not sure. But yeah, that comes to my head. Why do I think that? Because I see it's a sunny day. I see a lot of people not arguing. They not mad. Most people are with their family, their loved ones, their couples. They want to go out. They want to go enjoy life instead of being miserable and fighting and doing all of that. So therefore, that would give me the best type of thing in my head to predict everything like that. Or even out here today. Like as soon as I got off the train, I was just like, I love being around stuff like this. Like nobody arguing, everybody smiling, people minding their business, some people interacting, and it's a sunny day. So it's like, what else can you ask for New York? So that's how I feel.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna
That's
ask
it?
Carl because this question of like, especially on the mental, poetic elements of landscape, it's almost like Twitter. Like it doesn't even necessarily have a physical form, even though when we gather, it has a physical form.
Yes.
But dance definitely has a physical form, right? But that's also a kind of cipher. So one cannot exist without the other, really, right? Like maybe you can elucidate that, go more into that. You're very experienced in this kind of cipher.
Yeah, no, of course. No, I think Tamel did a great job of touching on what the cipher is, as far as it being this form of unity amongst people. Typically, when you have a cipher, it's a gathering of people, and they're sharing some sort of experience, and there's normally a medium that they're using to express themselves. And you could say rap, you could say dance, you could say art, music. You have musical ciphers where you have a bunch of musicians. They come together and they have a performance. It's a cipher, especially when they're practicing. You have a lot of musicians who flow, as Alan mentioned earlier, off the dome, which means straight from the heart. They're not really thinking about it. It's totally, unprepared. But ultimately, what happens is because those musicians and those dancers have such a unity, have such a strong connection, they ultimately link, and it works out beautifully. So my friends and I, we do this all the time. A beat will come on and we'll start dancing together, and we don't have to think about it. We just have to move. Now, how is it that we can get to that level? Because for some people, just the mention of the word dance, and they get a little bit nervous. They're like, "Oh no, that's not me, please." When you actually, so Alan and I, we taught a dance class together for a number of years called Urban Rhythms, and when it first started, it was working with a group of participants from Brownsville, from East New York, from those tough neighborhoods that you saw on the map that lacked those infrastructures. And yes, I 100% say there's a strong correlation there. There's no doubt about it, that the neighborhoods that have those poor infrastructures, that lack those resources, that lack those spaces, they have it the hardest. They have it the toughest in terms of school, education, food, jobs, and that does something to the body. That does something to the mind. People don't act the way that they do in terms of when you say violence because they're violent. It's the environment that they're in that causes them to act that way, or the way that they were raised, right? No one is born, for example, a killer or a fighter. They have, it's sort of like a learned behavior, and the biggest thing that teaches you that is your environment, the people you're surrounded with, as Alan mentioned earlier, the foods that you eat, and the different things that that you decide to partake in. And so with the cipher, you have a space, you have people that are sharing this experience, and the people who have perfected their craft by way of dance, by way of music, spent years practicing. Me personally, when I started, it was just it was one of these hot summer days with nothing to do around the house. School was out, and I was with my cousins. I was, with my family, and we were just sitting there, wondering what to do. And I went downstairs. We had a computer at the time, so this must have been like around the years 2007. So a little bit after the boom of the internet, when YouTube started putting out videos of people just like doing different things. And so one of the things that I was interested in was dance. I don't know why, but it was the thing to do during those times. And so I started practicing, I started learning. Come to find out, Brooklyn in particular has a community of dancers called Flexit, or Flexers, that is big, that has just started, and it's growing. And this was back in the year 2007, 2008, and I could just tell you a little bit of where it is now. And I can also talk about the connection between how violence and how infrastructure definitely plays a part, because the people who pioneered the style would gather up together in a big auditorium, okay? I would say anywhere from 200 to 500 people would be attending those sort of events, where there would be food in the back, there would be music playing, but then you also had the performers who spent time to practice and put together their choreography and their skits to perform for the audience. And the audience, of course, loved it. And they used to be filmed and be featured on the station called BCAT, which is no longer, it used to be a TV station. It's no longer there, but BCAT used to show Flex in Brooklyn. And so this is how the dancers got their name. So let me tell you the importance of that community and what it has done for those dancers, and the fact that I'm very lucky to have been part of that community and still am. What happens is, when you have people who grow up in these tough neighborhoods, and so the options are to either join a gang, commit more violence, go to school. But school, you know, sometimes it's tough because the students, the kids don't necessarily have the best of the best, right? And so they do cut class, and so they do hang out with their friends and do drugs and, you know, get into whatever act of violence that they get into. And that's just how it is in those poor neighborhoods. It's the truth, okay? But then what ended up happening was you have a community of dancers who started pioneering this dance style called flexing, and not just flexing. You know, it would be happening all throughout, you know, the New York City area, up in the Bronx, Queens, for example. Similar to having the flex dancers, you have the light feet dancers, which is another style that was pioneered. You have the break dancers. So when we talk about hip hop and where hip hop came from, hip hop is not just rapping. When a lot of people think of hip hop consists of a variety of parts, from rapping to dancing to graffiti to art to fashion. There's so much that goes into it, and the reason for that is, again, it was an escape from the violence, a gathering of those people to promote a much more healthier way of being and rejecting the status quo of this violence that was going on. And they just got fed up with it and said, let's do something more positive. So the dancers would get together and they would host these big events. People would come and have a great time. So now what ended up happening, instead of joining a gang, you would go to the cipher, and if you had beef with someone, or, you know, if you saw someone in the street, or they looked at you the wrong way, or you didn't particularly like their style, or whatever it is, this sort of aggression that you had, it was no longer that, you had to pick up a weapon and try to murder that person or try to hurt that person. It was, okay, we're in the cipher now, we're in this dance space now, the music is playing, let me see what you got. Let me see how your style is looking. How have you been perfecting? Because I've been perfecting great. I got this brand new technique that I want to show to everybody.
Let's try it out.
In a little bit. Yes. Okay. In a little bit, we're definitely going to try it. But just to wrap up, the cipher, if you ever get a chance, swing by the Union Square area on a Friday night, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This gathering of people to share their experiences, to share their emotions, and how they get to that moment is, it takes time, you know, to perfect their craft, which allows them to be able to freestyle. I mean, Tamel talked about it being, you know, straight out of your heart and it being feelings and you just sharing your opinion. It is, absolutely. I believe in order for you to also be able to do that, you need the skill set, right? People don't just, you know, be great dancers because out of nowhere, they practice. So this is us right here, actually.
That sounds like more sense. So okay, so
That's the cipher.
I want to suggest that we actually open up this workshop now, like a small cipher. Okay, so in order to do that, we gotta kind of draw some concepts, you know, some feelings, because it's got to resonate with people. So is there any, I don't know how to elicit that. Is there any, after seeing this presentation, is there any words that come to mind?
Well,
Or colors?
Before we get into that,
Okay.
well, let's just
jump in.
Let's just
Are there any words, like, seeing this presentation, are there any words that come to mind, in particular, colors that come to mind, anything?
Hopeful.
Hopeful?
Body.
Body.
Okay.
Okay, body,
Music.
hopeful,
Expression.
music, expression.
Expression or aggression?
expressions.
Now they're just feeling super aggressive.
I think
Real aggressive right now.
I think all of those things mentioned are important. Somebody said body, somebody said music, expression, hope, right? Hopeful, connection, absolutely. Let's actually take all of that, and we're gonna do something a little bit fun. Okay, we're gonna do a cipher right now, and you're gonna get to experience it firsthand. So
Is there a
what I'd
song,
like
or
for
should we
everyone
do love?
to
Should we
do,
do Kendrick Lamar?
let's do love. What I'd like for everyone to do is you can leave your things where they are. Just move to the back for us, okay, and form a small circle.